Please leave a comment about where you join us from. I'm genuinely curious who's keeping me company tonight. Enjoy the listening. At 3 o'clock in the morning, in the cramped kitchen of a rented two-room apartment in a sleeping district of Nizhny Novgorod, Jessica stood over the stove, stirring a thick sauce with a wooden spoon that her mother had once brought from the village of Semenovo. The spoon still bore faint traces of traditional painted ornamentation around the edge, worn down by 60 years and hundreds of hands, but it still carried the warmth of family. Lamb simmered slowly on low heat, releasing its juices. Carrots softened beneath it, and the apartment filled with that familiar scent from childhood, from her mother's hands, from holidays when the whole extended family gathered around a long table, children ran about, Uncle Pete brought out his accordion, and Grandma wept with happiness looking at her grandchildren. She had bought the meat yesterday at the local market, carefully choosing the pieces, feeling them, smelling them, bargaining with the mustached vendor who finally waved his hand and knocked off 100 rubles. Still, she spent half the pocket money Antony allowed her for women's little things. But today was special. Her husband had been promoted to commercial director. How could she skimp on such a celebration? Jessica scooped a little sauce with the edge of the spoon, blew on it, tasted it. The flavor was exactly right. Rich, with a gentle sweetness from the long-simmered carrots and the depth that came from the proper spices and 6 patient hours at the stove. Daughter, her mother had said not long before she died, when they cooked this dish together for her last birthday, her hands already trembling with weakness, but her voice still firm, you have to put your soul into it. Whoever eats with love will answer with love. The recipe had been passed down the female line for generations. From great-grandmother Matriona, who survived war and famine, to grandmother Claudia, to Mother Rose, and now to her, the last keeper of the family secret. Jessica remembered how 7 years ago Antony had come to court her in Semenovo, still in a cheap borrowed suit, ate 3 plates, and said, looking at her with shining eyes, "I'll marry you if only for this ragu." She had laughed then, thinking he was joking. After all, who falls in love over food when someone looks at you like your heart stops? Now she understood he had meant it. Jessica carefully packed the finished dish into a container, added fluffy rice, garnished it with a sprig of dill from the windowsill, the dill she had grown from seeds brought from the old garden. She wrapped everything in a clean kitchen towel so the food would stay warm until lunch. At 6 in the morning Antony appeared in the kitchen in his new suit that had cost a month's salary even before the promotion. Jessica couldn't help admiring him. Tall, stately, with a confident posture, nothing like the shy boy from Semenovo who used to blush when she took his hand. The scent of expensive cologne hit her nose, aggressively overpowering the aroma of spices, and she winced but immediately smiled, pouring him a cup of strong black coffee, the kind he liked, no sugar. "Congratulations on your first day as commercial director," she said. Mom would be proud. He didn't even look up from his phone, scrolling through work chats. Jessica noticed how fast his fingers flew across the screen, how tense his shoulders were under the expensive fabric. "Yeah," he muttered. "I packed your lunch," Jessica said, pointing to the container, warmth spreading in her chest at the thought of his joy. "I was cooking since 3 in the morning. Imagine. Mom's ragu, your favorite." Antony's face twisted as if she had announced a death in the family. His brows drew together, lips thinned, and something like disgust flashed in his eyes. "What were you even thinking?" he finally said, looking at her, and in that look there was none of the boy who once asked for seconds and kissed her onion-scented hands. "You smell of that onion from a mile away." "I just picked up my suit from the dry cleaner." "But the container is airtight. The smell won't. I'm having lunch with the board of directors today," he interrupted, raising his voice so she flinched and stepped back. "With Benjamin Simonovich himself, the owner of the entire holding. If I show up with this, everyone will think him some pauper from the village who can't afford a proper business lunch." He walked to the table, picked up the container with 2 fingers, holding it at arm's length as if it were a dead rat. Jessica felt something inside her contract at the gesture, so demonstrative, so humiliating. "Tony, and stop with this collective farm cooking," he threw over his shoulder as he pulled on his expensive coat without turning around. "Learn to make normal food. Order sushi like normal people do, so I don't have to be ashamed of my village wife in front of others." The door slammed. Jessica stood in the middle of the kitchen, feeling the word village wife swell inside her, filling her chest with something heavy and bitter. The funniest part was that he had grown up in the same kind of village, in a tractor driver's and milkmaid's family. His mother cooked the same soups and porridges, and their house smelled of stove smoke, sauerkraut, and fresh milk. But now, in his new suit, with his new position and new elite cologne scent, He had erased everything that tied him to the past, including her. Tears finally broke through, burning her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, inhaling the onion smell on her fingers, the smell he called shameful, the smell that for her was love and care. She didn't know how long she stood there, minutes, 5, 10, but her attention was caught by the black leather wallet on the hall table, the one she had given him for his last birthday, spending all her savings. His business center pass stuck out of the pocket, and beside it lay his driver's license, needed for guest parking registration on his first day in the new position. She imagined him standing at security, rummaging through pockets, paling as he realized he had forgotten the most important things. Without a second thought, Jessica wiped her tears with the back of her hand, threw on her old robe, pulled on the simple polka dot dress from the market, the one she wore to job interviews that never led anywhere because Anthony believed a wife should stay home and wait with hot dinner, grabbed the wallet, slipped into her worn-heeled shoes, and ran to the bus stop without glancing in the mirror. The minibus rattled along the outskirts, then the metro to Gorky Station in rush hour amid grim crowds, then on foot along Maxim Gorky Street past old merchant houses turned into offices and cafes, past windows with mannequins in clothes she could never afford. The glass skyscraper reflecting January clouds rose before her, 20 floors of steel and glass. Jessica stopped, craning her neck, feeling small and insignificant before this monument to someone else's success. At reception, the guard in strict uniform studied her passport for a long time, shifting his gaze from the photo to her face with suspicion and distrust. Jessica caught herself blushing under that look, though she had done nothing wrong. In the elevator, 2 women in expensive suits, high heels, and bags worth more than her yearly wardrobe gave her fleeting condescending glances. One deliberately stepped away as if afraid to get dirty from her cheap dress. Jessica lowered her eyes to her flat worn-heeled shoes, the run in her tights at the ankle, her market bag, and repeated to herself like a mantra, "Hand over the wallet and leave quickly. Don't linger, don't embarrass him further." On the 15th floor, stepping into a long corridor of grey carpet and glass partitions, she heard familiar laughter, the laughter Anthony used when they were happy, when he could still enjoy simple things. The laughter came from behind a glass wall where the office kitchen was, a small room with a coffee machine and microwave. Jessica approached, intending to call her husband, maybe even smile, show she held no grudge for the morning. She never could stay angry long, and froze at what she saw. Anthony stood surrounded by 2 colleagues. A man in expensive glasses named Alex, she had heard the name from her husband, and a striking woman with a fashionable bob haircut who looked at Tony the way Jessica herself once had. In her husband's hand was the container with the ragu. "Oh, your wife packed your lunch?" The woman giggled, her voice dripping with venom and mockery that made Jessica clench her fists. "Romance, my ass," Anthony sneered, and Jessica didn't recognize his voice, so casual, so eager to impress. "My wife still has the village mentality. I told her I'm lunching with Benjamin Simonovich, the owner of everything, and she shoves this at me." He held the container up to the woman's face. Alice. Jessica remembered her husband mentioned that name too often, too fondly. Alice pinched her perfectly manicured fingers over her nose and recoiled with a grimace. "Ooh, what's that smell?" "Smells like the countryside." "Village," Alice sneered. "There's half a kilo of onion in there, oil you could drown in. Imagine if I sat next to the boss with this. They'd think him a broke villager who can't afford a business lunch. Wife brought slop from home." Alex chuckled, adjusting his glasses. "So what are you going to do?" Anthony headed to the stainless steel trash bin in the corner. Each step echoed painfully in Jessica's chest. He raised the container over the bin, the very container she had lovingly packed with meat, rice, and a dill sprig. "Goodbye, village slop." Jessica pressed herself against the wall around the corner, covering her mouth so as not to cry out, not to reveal herself, not to rush in and snatch from his hands what belonged to her, her labor, her love, her mother's memory. Every word pierced her like glass shards. Village wife, slop, smells. She closed her eyes, unable to watch. The dull thud of the container hitting the metal bin echoed in her chest. Jessica opened her eyes. Alice was giggling. Alex nodded approvingly. Anthony wiped his hands on a napkin with a disgusted grimace as if he had touched something contagious. "There, the air's cleaner already," he tossed, turning to leave. But in the doorway appeared an older man with perfectly combed grey hair, in an expensive cashmere jacket, with the look of someone used to commanding and deciding hundreds of fates with a nod. "What's going on here?" His voice was quiet but filled the room. Alice and Alex straightened instantly like schoolchildren before a strict principal. Anthony paled, trying to give his face an innocent expression. Jessica bitterly noted the instant change, the hypocrisy, the readiness to pretend for gain. Benjamin slowly approached the trash bin, looked inside. His gaze lingered on the container lying among crumpled paper towels. Without a word, he bent down and retrieved it, shook off the napkin from the lid. "What's this smell, and who threw this away?" "This is spoiled lunch, Mr. Simonovich," Anthony stammered. Jessica heard the animal fear in his voice, the fear of being caught off guard. "My wife overdid it. It smells awful. I threw it out so it wouldn't stink up the office." Overdid it, Jessica repeated to herself, and something inside her finally broke. She had tasted the ragu that morning. It was perfect, as always, as her mother taught. He was lying. Lying to his boss to humiliate her further, to present her as inept, unable even to cook properly. But Benjamin wasn't listening to explanations. His nostrils flared. He took a step forward, and something changed in his face. The stern features softened, the gaze became distant as if remembering something long forgotten. Benjamin carefully removed the lid. Hot steam rose, filling the small office kitchen with the aroma of stewed meat, onion, carrot, garlic, and spices. Alice pinched her nose again, expecting the boss' angry reaction to the stench, ready to support his indignation with an obliging chuckle. Anthony squeezed his eyes shut, resigned to the reprimand, to the collapse of his career on the very first day. Instead, Benjamin leaned over the container and inhaled deeply. His face began to change, softening, losing the mask of authority he had likely worn for years. He took a clean fork from the drawer, speared a piece of lamb in the thick dark red sauce, put it in his mouth. His eyes widened. Tears glistened on his lashes, real tears he didn't even try to hide. He ate greedily, forgetting status, expensive jacket, and subordinates watching in silent astonishment. Second piece, third, fourth, silently, focused, the way one eats when finally finding something long lost, something searched for all life without hope. After the fourth bite he stopped, wiped his mouth with a monogram handkerchief from his breast pocket, and looked at the container as if seeing a ghost from the past. Where did this come from? His voice was hoarse, broken, nothing like the commanding tone of a minute ago. Who made this? Anthony stood at a crossroads. Jessica, pressed against the cold corridor wall, saw him making the decision. His Adam's apple bobbed, his eyes darted searching for a saving lie. Admitting his wife cooked it, the very village wife whose cooking he had just called spoiled, stinking slop, would mean the end. The boss would see him as a liar and a bore, unworthy of trust. "It's catering, Mr. Simonovich," Anthony's voice strengthened, finding firm ground. "A new service, Grandma's recipes. There's a chef who specializes in traditional Russian dishes. I threw it out because the courier was late, the packaging got dented. I'm a perfectionist, you know, can't stand when something doesn't look ideal." Benjamin looked at him with a long piercing gaze. Doubt was clear in the old man's eyes. He obviously sensed the faucet, but the interest in the taste, in what this flavor had awakened, the memories it raised from the depths, outweighed suspicion. "Fine," he said finally. The word sounded like a verdict. "Tomorrow at noon we have lunch with investors from Moscow. They're tired of restaurant food, complain everything tastes the same. I want to surprise them. Arrange for the chef from your catering to come here to the office and cook exactly the same dish right here on the kitchen, so it's served hot to management." Anthony paled even more. Jessica saw the blood drain from his face, his lips tremble. "The chef, to come here. That's an order. And mind you, if the taste is even slightly different, if anything is off, our conversation will be short. You understand me?" Benjamin turned and left, taking the half-eaten container with him. Her container, her ragu, her love, thrown away and retrieved by strangers' hands. Alice and Alex exchanged glances full of astonishment mixed with gloating and hurried after him, leaving Anthony alone in the kitchen. He stood motionless, staring into space. Jessica saw relief that the boss believed give way to slow, icy realization of the trap he had set for himself. The catering grandma's recipes did not exist. The professional chef did not exist. Only one woman on earth could make this dish with this exact taste, the taste that made the holding owner cry. And she was standing around the corner in a cheap market dress and worn-heeled shoes, the woman he had just called a village wife, whose labor he called stinking slop, whose love he nearly threw into the trash before giggling Alice. Jessica stood there a few more minutes, unable to move, listening to Anthony pacing the empty kitchen muttering to himself. Only when his footsteps moved toward his office did she finally peel herself from the wall and walk on unsteady legs to the elevator. She still hadn't given him the wallet clutched in her hand. She returned home before her husband and spent the whole day sitting in the kitchen staring at one spot, lights off, TV off, untouched food, just sitting and waiting, though she didn't know what exactly. The storm that would inevitably break, or the miracle that would fix everything. The storm came late in the evening. Anthony burst into the apartment, slamming the door so hard that their wedding photo fell from a shelf and the glass cracked diagonally, dividing their frozen happy faces with a slanted line. "It's all because of you," he shouted from the doorway without taking off his coat. Jessica heard his expensive shoes leave dirty tracks on the linoleum she had washed that morning. "Your village slop almost ruined my entire career." She came out of the kitchen, mechanically wiping her hands on her apron though they were dry, just a habit formed over years, the gesture of a woman always ready to serve. "Tony, what happened?" He threw his briefcase onto the sofa and began pacing, unbuttoning his shirt collar, tugging at his tie. Jessica watched this man, who that morning had seemed so confident, so unattainable in his new suit, with detached curiosity. Benjamin Simonovich, the owner of the entire holding. Anthony spat the name like a curse, saw your ragu, tasted it, bad luck, and he liked it. Not just liked it, the old bastard nearly cried. Now he demands the chef from the catering come tomorrow to cook for the Moscow investors. Jessica felt something stir in her chest, a tiny sprout of hope breaking through the pain. "So he liked it," she said quietly. "So I'm not cooking for nothing. Don't get happy too soon." He cut her off roughly, and the sprout withered before it could bloom. "I told him it's professional catering, a real chef, not my wife who only finished high school and can't cook properly." He went to the bedroom, rummaged in the dresser, came back with a medical mask and dark glasses he had worn last summer during conjunctivitis, and threw them at her. "Tomorrow you'll come with me to the office. You'll cook." But, he raised a finger, the gesture reminding her of a schoolteacher scolding a careless student. "No one must know you're my wife. You'll wear a chef's uniform, this mask, glasses, introduce yourself as Marina from catering. Keep your mouth shut." Jessica looked at the white disposable mask in her hands. It smelled of pharmacy and something else she couldn't name, and felt something inside her slowly die. And if someone finds out? No one will. Well, enter through the service entrance. Ill-worn security. You're nobody, just staff. Understood. He came close. She smelled his cologne mixed with sweat, the smell of fear he tried so hard to hide behind aggression. When addressing Mr. Simonovich, no Tony, only Mr. Anthony, or just be silent. Your service personnel. And most important, he leaned to her ear, his breath burning her skin. The taste must be perfect, exactly the same. If you mess up, divorce. I'm not joking. Jessica wanted to answer, wanted to scream in his face, throw the cursed mask back, tell him she heard every word in that kitchen, every mockery, every village slop. But years of silence, years of submission, fear of being left without a roof in a strange city paralyzed her will. She only nodded, accepting the role of an invisible person. Before dawn she stood before the bathroom mirror examining her reflection in the oversized white chef's uniform Anthony had somehow obtained. The sleeves had to be rolled up. She thought how strangely life was arranged. She looked like a child playing grown-up, but this was no game. It was a tormenting performance directed by her own husband. We enter through the back door, Anthony instructed from the doorway, checking his phone. No talking to you. You take the freight elevator, I take the regular one. We don't know each other. Security is warned. Go straight to the executive kitchen, cook, serve, be silent. Jessica put on the medical mask, pulled on the chef's hat, and looked at herself again. Her face was invisible, her eyes hidden. She had become no one, a function, a shadow. Tears flowed under the mask, hot and salty, but she wiped them before leaving the bathroom. Tears were also part of her that needed to be hidden. The service entrance was a narrow corridor past cardboard boxes and trash bins. The freight elevator smelled of machine oil and staleness. Jessica rode alone, clutching her bag of ingredients, feeling like contraband smuggled in secretly. The executive kitchen was another world. Stainless steel equipment, marble countertops the size of a truck hood, a touch panel oven she didn't even know how to turn on. But to Jessica, all this luxury was a prison with chrome bars. She took out the ingredients. Fresh lamb bought yesterday evening at the market with her last money, onion, carrot, garlic, and the old tin box from Soviet Monpanzer candies, the lid still bearing a faded picture of lollipops, closing with a characteristic click. Inside was her mother's secret spice mix. Caraway, black pepper, coriander, dried herbs, all hand-ground, all in proportions her mother knew by heart and passed to her before dying. Jessica began chopping onion, and tears flowed uncontrollably, not from the onion, from everything else, from memories, from pain, from her mother's voice ringing so clearly in her head. Daughter, cook with soul. If your heart hurts, the ragu will be bitter. If you love, the one who eats will surely feel it. How to cook with love when your heart is torn to pieces. But gradually something changed. She was no longer cooking for Antony, not for the investors, not for the fearsome Benjamin Simonovich. She was cooking to prove to herself that she was still worth something, that her mother's recipe was not slop, that her hands were not a shame. The kitchen door burst open. Jessica flinched, thinking Antony had come to check and command, but on the threshold stood the grey-haired man, Benjamin Simonovich in person. He inhaled deeply the aroma that reminded him of home, and the stern features of his face smoothed, softened, became almost human. His gaze slid over the stove, countertop, ingredients, and stopped on the old Monpanzer tin. He froze, his eyes widened. "Turn around," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "And please take off the mask." Jessica slowly turned, trembling fingers pulling off the mask, then the hat. Her plain, makeup-free, tear-stained face was exposed before him. He looked closely and shook his head. "You're not her, too young. Where did you get this recipe?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the tin. "Where did you get this box?" "From my mother," Jessica answered, her voice shaking. "She died 3 years ago. This was her box. She always kept spices in it, from my grandmother." Tears streamed down Benjamin Simonovich's cheeks, real tears he didn't try to hide. "What was your mother's name?" "Rose. Rose Nikotikna Kolosova. She lived in Semenovo, then in the 90s moved to Nizhny, worked at the river station selling food." The name exploded in the kitchen silence. Benjamin closed his eyes, his lips moved soundlessly, then he spoke slowly, heavily. 30 years ago, in '94, I was completely bankrupt. Partners cheated me, my wife left, they evicted me from the apartment. I slept at the river station, thought it was the end. Only one woman didn't look at me like trash, the one who sold food at the pier. Every evening she gave me a plate of hot ragu for free. She said, "Eat, son, life is like a wheel." And she kept spices in the exact same Monpanzer box. I remember that picture my whole life. Jessica covered her mouth with her hand. That was my mother. She once mentioned helping a man at the station who later became someone big. I thought she was making it up. Noise came from behind the door. Antony burst in, pale, eyes panicked. "Mr. Simonovich, forgive me. The chef is almost. Let the waiter bring the ragu to the meeting room." Benjamin slowly turned to him. "You said catering. Grandma's recipes. Professional chef?" "Yes, exactly." The old man's gaze fell on Jessica's hands, on the simple gold ring on her ring finger, then on Antony's hand with the identical ring. "No more mask," Benjamin said to Jessica. "You'll come with me to the meeting room. Sit beside me." "But she's just a cook," Antony stammered. Silence. The meeting room with its long dark wood table, leather chairs, and view of the Volga met them with silence. 3 Moscow investors watched curiously as Benjamin personally pulled out a chair for the woman in the baggy chef's uniform, seating her to his right in the place of honor. The ragu was served. The investors tasted cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm. "Delicious!" One exclaimed. "This is real, not restaurant stamp. Like grandma's in the village, only better." The second nodded. Benjamin stood, surveyed the table, lingered on Antony huddled in a chair at the far end. "Gentlemen, this ragu is a masterpiece. You yourselves just confirmed it. But there is a person here who this morning called this dish," a pause hung over the table, "village slop, garbage, spoiled, stinking food." He pointed to Jessica's ring, then to Antony's. "This woman is not a caterer's chef. Her name is Jessica Yurievna, and she is the legal wife of this gentleman, our new commercial director." The investors stared at Antony. In their eyes Jessica saw what he feared most, not anger, not indignation, but disgust, the same disgust with which he had looked at her ragu, her market dress, her worn-heeled shoes. Benjamin turned to Jessica. His voice was gentle but carried the authoritative note that allowed no evasion. Jessica Yurievna, I want to ask you a question, in front of everyone. Answer honestly. Does your husband appreciate your cooking? When you make this ragu for him, does he thank you? Antony looked at her pleadingly. She read the silent cry in his eyes. Lie, save me, for our salary, for the apartment, lie. One such a look would have made her sacrifice herself, swallow the offense, say what he wanted. But before her eyes stood the image of Antony holding the container over the trash bin, Alice pinching her nose, the laughter, village slop. Before, my husband loved this ragu and asked for seconds, Jessica answered loudly and clearly. And yesterday morning he said it stank, that it was shameful, that it belonged in the trash. He was ashamed to admit I was his wife because I'm a village woman who can't cook properly. Benjamin nodded and rose. Meeting over, gentlemen. Investors, please enjoy dessert in the next room. Jessica Yurievna, to my office. We'll discuss a restaurant partnership contract. He looked at Antony. The gaze was icy. And you, Antony, come to me after lunch. I'll make you eat every spoonful of the ragu you tried to throw away so you understand exactly what you lost. The contract was signed the same day. Now she would earn 10 times more than the pocket money Antony gave her for household needs. But Jessica did not rush to celebrate. Returning to the apartment first, she began packing her things. Her gaze fell on her husband's tablet lying on the coffee table with blinking notifications. What she found in the messages caused pain worse than the morning humiliation. My wife cook her slop again. The whole apartment stinks of onion. I'm sick of looking at her, Antony wrote to a friend. Hold on, bro. Once you get promoted, divorce her. She's basically a free housekeeper, cooks, cleans, irons, and costs nothing. And in bed she's a log, village. Alice is 100 times better. Jessica read on. Candid photos of Alice, weekend plans, messages like can't wait to ditch my village wife and wake up next to you. Tears didn't come. The pain had exceeded their threshold. She methodically photographed the entire correspondence, emailed it to herself, saved it to the cloud, then closed the tablet and put the suitcase back in the closet. Today she would not run. She would wait. At 9 in the evening the lock turned. Antony entered, stooped, grey-faced, expecting an empty apartment or a sobbing wife with suitcases. Instead he saw the table set for a romantic dinner, candles, the beautiful dishes they received for their wedding and never used, plates under metal lids. At the head of the table sat Jessica in the red satin nightgown he had bought her on their honeymoon and never asked her to wear since. Good evening, she said softly, almost tenderly. You must be tired. Sit down. I made something special. He froze in the doorway, suspicion warred with hunger and hoped that everything would somehow sort itself out. He sat, reached for the largest lid, lifted it. On the plate lay a brown envelope with divorce papers and an old phone displaying an enlarged screenshot of his chat with Alice. Can't wait to ditch my village wife. Jessica leaned close to his ear. Help yourself, Tony. You said my ragu was poison, so today I'll give you your reality. You snooped in my things. He exploded, grabbing the phone and hurling it against the wall so the screen shattered. Spying on your husband. Is that even legal? Those are men's talks, jokes. Alice is just a colleague. He jumped up, knocking over the chair, took a step toward her, hand raised. You have no idea what you've done. Without me you're nothing. You'll die under a bridge. The apartment is in my name. Hit me, Jessica said without retreating, jutting her chin. Go ahead. Hit me now so my story is complete with evidence. Assault added. We already have plenty. The judge won't even think twice whom to believe. His hand hung in the air, then dropped. Jessie, honey, his voice became plaintive, eyes moist. Let's talk like humans. I got carried away. Why air dirty laundry? What will my mother say? She has a bad heart. Jessica took out her phone and showed the screen. 5 minutes before you came in, I sent some interesting things to your mother. Screenshots where you call me a village log. To your father, photos of bills with Alice. To your uncle, recording of your morning rant about village slop. And separately, to your colleagues' wives. I think they'll be interested to know what their husbands discuss in the men's chat. Antony's phone in his pocket began vibrating, then ringing, then vibrating again. Mom flashed on the screen. He rejected the call, immediately Dad. Messages poured in. Tony, what is this? Call back immediately. Son, are you out of your mind? Shame on the family. Jessica went to the bedroom, took out the small pre-packed suitcase, only the essentials. Her mother's photo, the spice tin, a couple of dresses, documents, and headed for the door. Anthony rushed after her, grabbed her arm. Wait, you can't just leave. Who will clean, cook, iron my shirts? She slowly turned and looked at his hand on her wrist, then into his eyes. Ask Alice. Or eat your pride, they say it's quite nourishing. She pulled her hand free, opened the door, and turned on the threshold. If you want to talk about divorce, call my lawyer. If you miss village food, welcome to Rose's Heritage Restaurant on Upper Volga Embankment. We open in 2 months. But be warned, it's not cheap. The door closed. From outside came the sound of receding footsteps, then silence. Several months later, on the Volga Embankment in one of the most beautiful districts of Nizhny Novgorod, an old restored merchant mansion glowed with lights, red brick walls, wrought iron balconies. Above the entrance hung a sign in golden letters. Rose's Heritage Homestyle Kitchen. The parking lot was full of expensive cars. Reservations were booked a month in advance. Restaurant critics wrote rave reviews. Politicians and businessmen all wanted to try the legendary ragu that made Benjamin cry. On the spacious kitchen, Jessica commanded a dozen employees with the calm natural authority of someone who knows their worth. She wore a white uniform with gold embroidery. Jessica on the chest. Her face was well-groomed and radiant. Her posture that of a person finally in their rightful place. Benjamin personally brought the vice-governor to the restaurant. Mikhail Andreevich, meet Jessica Yurievna, the golden hands of our city, my business partner. The vice-governor tasted the ragu. His face lit up. Amazing. Like Mom's in the village, only even better. And the Monpansa tin with her mother's spice mix stood in a place of honor behind glass in the display near the entrance with a plaque. Heritage of Rose Nikolasova, the woman who saved a man with a plate of ragu. Late in the evening when the guests had left, Jessica stood at the window looking at the Volga lights. Her gaze slid along the embankment to a lone figure on the bench opposite the restaurant, a thin man in a rumpled jacket and scuffed shoes, clutching a cheap supermarket plastic container. Something familiar in the silhouette, the stooped shoulders, the way he held his head. After that day in the office, Benjamin hadn't fired him immediately, demoted him to ordinary manager. Then the story of the village slop spread through the city's corporate world, and Anthony landed on an unofficial blacklist. Now he worked as a sales floor manager in a grocery store, rented a room in the Somuvo district, and collectors called daily for the credit cards he had maxed out when he was a successful director. Alice disappeared the second day after the scandal, transferred to the Moscow branch and blocked him everywhere. His mother stopped answering calls. His father said, "You are no son of mine," and hung up. Uncle sent one message, "Shame on the family," and blocked him too. He looked at the restaurant windows where in the warm glow of crystal chandeliers Jessica moved, laughed, talked with guests, looked happy. He took a step toward the door, then another, but the security guard blocked the entrance. "Sorry, we're fully booked and have a dress code." The guard's gaze slid over the rumpled jacket and scuffed shoes. "You'd better leave." Anthony returned to the bench, opened the plastic container with cold rice and a piece of tasteless chicken in congealed sauce, and ate mechanically while tears dripped into the food, mixing with it. He remembered the taste of Jessica's ragu, the explosive sharpness, tender meat melting on the tongue, the aroma of spices and the old tin, the taste he had called garbage and now wanted more than anything in the world, but would never taste again. He took out his phone, opened the gallery. Only one photo of Jessica remained. She stood in their old kitchen in a worn robe, smiling at the camera, holding a ladle. "Sorry, Jessie," he whispered so quietly no one heard. Too late. Jessica at the restaurant window didn't peer at the silhouette on the bench, didn't try to recognize it. She turned and walked back to the kitchen, to her world where her mother's Monpansa tin stood on the shelf, where she was not a village wife but a chef with golden hands. Life is like a wheel, Rose had once said to the man at the river station. Today you're at the bottom, tomorrow at the top. The main thing is not to give up. The wheel had come full circle. The past remained behind glass.